single Russian missile is knocked out a mile above the carrier. 10 missiles have penetrated the carrier's defenses. 2 of the missiles have suffered manufacturing defects and never detonate as they strike the carrier. The Zircon hypersonic anti-ship missile is, after all, bleeding-edge tech for the Russians. Bugs in the software and defects in the manufacturing are inevitable. The missiles are moving so fast, however, that sheer kinetic energy alone punches a hole through the decks of the carrier, each missile penetrating almost to the bottom hole. The electronic brain in one of the other missiles has slightly misjudged its geometry and explodes in the ocean a few hundred feet away from the carrier. The other 7, however, find their mark. The hypersonic missiles move so fast that they penetrate several decks before the onboard explosives are triggered, which only increases the destructing potential of each missile. Armed with 800 pounds of explosives, the Zircon carries only half the explosive power of a Granite anti-ship missile, but with 7 direct hits, it doesn't matter much. Explosions rip through the inner decks of the carrier, buckling the flight deck and destroying dozens of aircraft in the below-deck hangar. Secondary fuel explosions rock the ship as black smoke belches out. Hundreds of sailors have died in seconds. Hundreds more will die soon. The carrier is dead in the water, but she doesn't sink. The incredible size and engineering of a supercarrier makes it almost impossible to sink with anything less than a massed missile attack. That's why the Soviets planned on using 100 bombers to do the task. Russia's new Zircon hypersonic missiles are deadly to the U.S. Navy, but they are still available in such low numbers that unless Russia dedicated the majority of its stockpile to a single attack, sinking a U.S. carrier is still incredibly unlikely. Achieving a mission kill, however, is very likely, and though the carrier won't sink, it'll be out of combat for at least a year as it undergoes repairs. Modern Russia would be very hard-pressed to sink a U.S. carrier. Finding and hitting a carrier out at sea is incredibly difficult, especially when it's on the move. Without a recon fleet of air assets the size and scope of the U.S.'s own fleet, and the ability to dominate the skies far from its own shores, Russia's first
Morse Mutual Insurance. How can we help you?
In the first place.
I'll do my best.
Russia is moving to develop land-based variants of the Zircon anti-ship missile because it recognizes that in a realistic scenario, its Tu-22 bombers would be unlikely to survive long enough to actually get in range of a carrier out at sea, thanks to the U.S. fighter bases in South Korea and Japan.
This video is sponsored by Vikings War of Clans. Vikings War of Clans was inspired by the best strategy and RPG games of the 90s, like Age of Empires. What makes Vikings World so addictive is that more than 20 million online players are constantly changing the way the game evolves. Vikings is holding a competition where they will give away Spark DJI drones to 3 people who reach level 10 and a Phantom drone to 1 person who reaches the highest level. Download Vikings for free and support the infographic show at the same time by clicking the links in the description below. With our links, you'll receive a special bonus of 200 gold coins and a protective shield. Our nickname in the game is the Infographic Show, spelled as one word. Search for us and we can play together. Now, let's move on to the main part of our video. China's meteoric economic rise in the last 3 decades has seen the world's largest nation pick itself up from its agrarian roots to become a robust and modern economy. While not more powerful than the US economically, China's is the only economy in the world to truly rival the US's. Yet all of China's economic expansion has created a crippling national Achilles heel: its overwhelming reliance on naval trade routes to export its trade goods and supply its ravenous appetite for oil. If China is to truly become a peer competitor to the US, it must secure and defend its access to the world's most important shipping lanes. In today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're taking a look at the Asian powerhouse and asking, is China ready to take on the US Navy? For decades, China focused primarily on maintaining national sovereignty by establishing a large ground force capable of fighting off another Japanese invasion or their former Soviet rivals. As China's economy expanded, though, its reliance on maritime trade grew to a staggering disproportion. While every nation relies on maritime trade, China's economy depends on the sea for 60 to 80% of its imports and exports, and almost all of its oil supply. This has placed China in a precarious situation where it is uniquely vulnerable to disruption of those trade routes and forced to shift in focus from a ground army to a growing naval and air force. China's maritime strategic position is unique and completely stacked against it. With the bulk of its oil passing through the Indian Ocean, another of China's longtime rivals, India, is in a position to easily disrupt and even completely shut down Chinese shipping. While China maintains a larger and better equipped naval force than India, Indian ships would enjoy land-based support and quick resupply, while China would have to find a way to forward deploy a sizable battle group to the Indian Ocean that could fend off not just the Indian Navy, but the land-based Indian Air Force as well. Not only is this currently strategically impossible for the limited Chinese Navy, but China also lacks the supply and logistics ships needed to keep a task force out at sea for extended periods of time. War against the US would likely involve India as an American ally, but even if it didn't, China would still have to face America's formidable Pacific Fleet. With 2,000 aircraft and 200 ships, to include 33 nuclear attack submarines, America's Pacific Fleet alone is more than a match for China's entire Navy, which numbered at 193 combat ships and 710 aircraft. In any conflict, the US Pacific Fleet would also quickly be augmented by other American naval forces. So could China hope to fend off the US Pacific Fleet in the event of war? In 1996, in response to the US granting a visa to Taiwan's President Lee Teng-hui, China launched massive military exercises meant to intimidate Taiwan, beginning with live-fire missile and artillery firing just kilometers from Taiwan's shores. This was followed by a widely publicized amphibious assault exercise meant to signal that China was ready and willing to cross the Taiwan Strait and invade the long independent island. In response, the United States deployed 3 aircraft carrier battle groups to the area and an amphibious assault ship, the largest display of American military might in Asia since Vietnam. This brief confrontation forced the Chinese to admit that they could not hope to stop the US from defending Taiwan, and internally, Chinese military leadership doubted the possibility of defeating the US Navy in any combat scenario. Humiliated by the US's response and their inability to prevent it, China reshuffled its military priorities, placing a much greater emphasis on its naval, missile, and air forces. 2 decades later, their efforts have paid off in spades, with China boasting the largest ballistic missile force in the world and a competent, if still limited, navy. Yet China is still saddled with a great deal of internal issues, the most pressing being the systemic corruption that has for decades thrived amongst the Communist Party leadership and the armed forces both. Despite Xi Jinping's anti-corruption purges, the damage to China's military by a long legacy of corrupt and